Okay. Subcommittee on National Security, Illicit Finance, and International Institutions, Financial Institutions will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled Protecting America's Savings, Examining the Economics of the Multi-Billion-Dollar Romance Confidence Scam Industry. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. With that, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. I want to welcome our witnesses to our hearing today, which is devoted to analyzing a pervasive threat to everyday Americans, confidence scams. Before we jump in, I'd like to note that today's hearing we will be referring to this scam as confidence scams, or otherwise its name is known as pig butchering. The scammers targeting innocent Americans use this term because the scams resemble the practice of fattening a hog before slaughter. I believe we probably can do better than calling somebody pigs. But anyway, the scams rely on trust. Trust is built over weeks or months. Trust and confidence are paramount for this scam to be successful. I'm sure we all received a message from a confidence scammer. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the texts have increased dramatically. They can feel random, and they are quickly deleted, but can be as innocent as, Peter, where have you been? Or, hey, John, are you still interested in grabbing a cup of coffee? Many would delete the message right away, but some people reply, correcting the individual, and a conversation begins. For men, the scammer will pretend to be a woman, and for women, the opposite is true. Scammers will spend weeks having innocent conversations, all the while building trust that they are who they say they are. My staff spoke to one victim who, after months of daily interactions, truly believed I said I had zero doubt that Anna was truly Anna. I knew everything about her, and I knew without a doubt that she cared about me. Once confidence is built and the victim is lulled into a false sense of security, the scammer will discuss how well their cryptocurrency investment portfolio is performing. These scammers will go to great detail about how a close confidant or family member has inside information on future earning potential of cryptocurrencies. They will even send screenshots and videos of their portfolio and promise they can guide the victim to the same level of wealth. That is an important point. They never directly ask for money. The scammer instructs victims to send money to various platforms which are developed to look real and controlled by the crime boss. The victims believe they will always have control of their money, or so they think. Once the victim has bought in, their so-called guide will coach them through setting up their own crypto accounts or provide step-by-step instructions on wiring money to bank accounts in Southeast Asia. Scammers have become incredibly adept with U.S. banking regulations and will prep their victim with ways to avoid suspicion. One victim was told to tell the bank staff handling this wire transfer that the money was for purchasing goods from a Chinese supplier in Hong Kong. Victims may initially send small amounts to a crypto exchange or only wire a small amount to set up their own fictitious trading account. To sustain the ruse, scammers will present false account information purportedly showing victims' investments that are growing. Scammers may even allow victims to cash out a portion of their initial investment to maintain a semblance of authenticity. Scammers will continue to pressure victims to pull their savings and liquidate retirement funds until there's simply nothing left to send. Those carrying out the scams know that cryptocurrencies hold a promise for wealth and diversification of one's portfolio. They use this promise to their advantage, but unbeknownst to the victim, none of it is real. The crypto they purchase is not real, and the returns shown never existed. Confidence scams are a growing threat, and according to John Griffin, an economics professor from the University of Texas at Austin, have resulted in a $75 billion windfall for Chinese criminal organizations from January 2020 to February 24. Just last Monday, the FBI released the 23 cryptocurrency fraud report, which stated that the investment fraud amassed an amount estimated at $5.6 billion in losses for 23, a 45% increase from the previous year. Herein lies the problem. Confidence scams are a pervasive issue that affect red districts and blue districts. These scams target the most vulnerable in our country, leading to their life savings and, in some cases, shattering families. It is abundantly clear that more education is needed. This is a scam that has largely flown under the radar because often the victims are embarrassed and to come forward to say they were tricked. It is incumbent upon Congress to sound the alarm and warn our constituents. This is why we're holding this hearing today. And testifying before us today is a diverse panel representing the state, local, and federal response to confidence scams. It is obvious that more can be done to confront this problem, and holding this hearing is an important first step. With that, the Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today to discuss the deep relationship confidence scams. This type of scam starts with a perpetrator reaching out to a victim through text messages or social media, direct message, and then working with them over a period of months to develop a relationship with the target to garner their trust, just as you've heard examples by our chairman. Ultimately, the scammer convinces the victim to invest in a supposedly lucrative investment opportunity. Perpetrators prey on the vulnerable individuals, even combing through social media and publicly available information to target those who have recently experienced maybe an illness or a death in the family. Victims oftentimes ignore the fraud warnings from their bank because they are convinced that the relationship and the investment are legitimate. The financial losses for victims are disastrous. In some cases, they empty their entire bank accounts, they take out home equity lines of credit, or even second mortgages, or convince their friends and family to invest in their assets as well. And to compound the crime, in most cases, the perpetrators of these schemes are victims themselves. Transnational criminal organizations based in East and Southeast Asia traffic individuals, luring them in with false job advertisements. Once the applicant is in a foreign country, they are held oftentimes against their will and then forced to carry out these deep relationship confidence scams campaigns, often threatened with physical abuse or even starvation if they don't meet the daily quotas. This type of scheme has gained in popularity over the last few years, with some estimates suggesting that it garnered more than $75 billion globally just between January 2020 and February of 2024. Fraud schemes are on the rise in general, and the bad actors are finding new and creative ways to defraud consumers. In 2023 alone, the Federal Trade Commission received 2.6 million fraud complaints, resulting in reported loss of $10 billion, a figure that experts believe significantly underrepresents the actual loss due to underreporting. Examples again given by Mr. Chairman. It is imperative that we address these growing problems. Although I appreciate the bipartisan approach to tackling this matter, we cannot overlook the fact that many of my colleagues across the aisle have been working relentlessly to defund the very agencies that are responsible for combating these financial crimes, and they are also attacking our nation's law enforcement like the FBI. We simply will not be able to crack down on these deep relationship confidence scams and protect our constituents' hard-earned savings if these agencies don't have the resources they need. We've heard about the amount of dollars, the number of people who are being scammed. It's going to take resources for us to be able to bring an end to this. So I hope today's investigatory hearing only underscores the vital significance of our law enforcement and the financial crime agencies. Thank you again to our witnesses, and I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
We thank the ranking member. Today we welcome the testimony of our witness panel. We begin with Dara Daniels. Ms. Daniels is Associate Director, Research and Analysis Division at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. Matthew Noyes. Mr. Noyes is Cyber Policy and Strategy Director at the United States Secret Service. Scott Rembrandt. Mr. Rembrandt is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Strategic Policy, Office of Terrorist Finance and Financial Crimes at the Department of Treasury. And Ms. Erin West. Ms. West is the Deputy District Attorney at the Santa Clara County District Office Attorney's Office, and I saw where she was also in the Wall Street Journal the last couple days, so congratulations on making a national paper about this very issue, by the way. So thank you for taking time to be here with us. We look forward to your presentation. You're recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, your written statement must be part of the record. Just as a housekeeping note, please, when you speak, pull the microphone to you. Those boxes will pull forward. The gentleman on the end is recording everything, and he needs to be able to hear what you say, as well as the members of the dais. So please pull those microphones close to you and just take a bite out of them, make sure you get that close. With that, we'll recognize Ms. Daniels for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman McHenry, Ranking Member Waters, Chairman Luetkemeyer, Ranking Member Beatty, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Dara Daniels, and I'm career staff and have been with Treasury since 2016, and specifically at Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, since 2018. I'm the Associate Director of FinCEN's Research and Analysis Division. FinCEN's mission is to safeguard the financial system from illicit use and promote national security. This mission is extensive, as most forms of crime and threats to national security have a financial nexus. This requires a careful allocation of FinCEN's resources to focus on work most likely to protect the lives and livelihoods of the American people, a mission that my team of dedicated career employees and I take very seriously. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear to discuss the important topic of virtual asset investment schemes. FinCEN, along with partners at Treasury and throughout the U.S. government, is very focused on the threats posed by these schemes and other types of fraud. Virtual asset investment scams are one of the ways that criminals are targeting the public and exploiting the financial system for their own personal gain. These criminal activities target the American public and have caused billions of dollars in losses, as well as other devastating and measurable consequences for victims. These schemes are part of a broader trend. Between 2013 and 2023, FinCEN observed an increase in fraud and cybercrime in Bank Secrecy Act, BSA data, each year. FinCEN has long focused on targeting transnational criminal organizations, human traffickers, cyber criminals, and fraudsters, all of whom are involved in the virtual asset investment scam problem set. In September 2023, FinCEN published an alert on the topic of virtual asset investment scams. This alert explained common methodologies associated with these scams, including tactics used by scammers to extract payments from victims. It also provided red flag indicators to assist financial institutions with identifying and reporting suspicious activity potentially linked to these scams. Since FinCEN issued this alert, we have received over 9,000 filings that reference it. We have observed a steady increase in reporting on these schemes each month since the alert's publication. For example, in December 2023, FinCEN received 437 reports that referenced the alert. In August 2024, FinCEN received over 1,500 reports. These filings are predominantly submitted by depository institutions and cryptocurrency exchanges. Preliminary analysis of reports filed under the alert show links to various named jurisdictions, top U.S. states where victims are located, and the significant amount of time that perpetrators spend developing a relationship with their victims, who on average are in communication for more than 100 days over the course of the scam. FinCEN is using the insights provided through Bank Secrecy Act data and its reporting to inform our collaboration with a variety of stakeholders, including regulatory, law enforcement, other government partners, and the private sector. BSA data is playing an important role in helping law enforcement detect, investigate, and prosecute virtual asset investment schemes. FinCEN actively provides leads and analytic support to our government partners to identify leads for new investigations and further existing ones. FinCEN, through its public-private partnership initiatives and information sharing authorities, is encouraging collaboration between public and private sectors to increase awareness and help detect, investigate, and deter cybercrime and fraud, including these schemes. Important authorities and programs that we are leveraging include the Rapid Response Program, FinCEN Exchange, Capacity Building, Sections 314A and 314B of the USA Patriot Act, and FinCEN's implementing regulations. I want to conclude by thanking the committee for the opportunity to testify today on this very important topic. We are committed to doing everything we can to detect and deter these bad actors and to help law enforcement hold them accountable. My colleagues and I at FinCEN appreciate the continued bipartisan support from Congress in our efforts to safeguard the financial system from illicit use. I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. With that, we go to Mr. Noyes. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Luetkemeyer, Ranking Member Beatty, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing today. I'm honored to be here alongside my colleagues from Treasury and Aaron West, whose work in the REACT Task Force I've long admired, but until today I'd yet to meet in person. These scams start with a simple message. It's been a long time, Tom. How are you? Millions of unsolicited electronic messages like this are sent to Americans. Their friendly nature belie that they are sent from overseas by human trafficking victims caught in an organized transnational confidence scam that is defrauding Americans of billions of dollars. It is imperative that those criminally involved in this crime are brought to justice. I serve as the Cyber Policy and Strategy Director for the Secret Service's Office of Investigations. A computer scientist by job series, I am now responsible for developing the strategy that guides the efforts of the Secret Service's global network of over 160 offices and 3,000 personnel assigned to the Office of Investigations. Countering transnational financial fraud is the founding purpose of the Secret Service. Today, our network of cyber fraud task forces and our partners are observing a disturbing rise in the volume, sophistication, and impact of transnational fraud schemes. Well, in fiscal year 2023, the Secret Service recovered over $1.2 billion in cyber fraud losses. It remains the case that transnational fraud threats far exceed the current capacity of U.S. law enforcement to sufficiently deter. Perhaps the most troubling of the various transnational fraud schemes are the confidence scams being perpetrated by operators of scam camps in Southeast Asia. As detailed in my written testimony, and as from your opening remarks, Chairman and Ranking Member, these scam camps are estimated to generate illicit revenue of over $40 billion a year. They operate at low cost by recruiting and forcing human trafficking victims, primarily from developing countries, to work as scam operators, sending electronic messages to defraud people worldwide. Defeating this organized criminal activity is not just a humanitarian imperative, but a critical national security concern, as we have seen substantial interplay between these sorts of organized transnational fraud schemes and foreign efforts to evade sanctions, steal funds, profit from ransomware, and other criminal activity. So, what should we do about this? There's no silver bullet to addressing the epidemic of transnational fraud. What is necessary is an international effort to make progress in 5 areas. We need to, 1, counter the scam operators by working with international partners to rescue the human trafficking victims, arrest those operating these scam camps, and seize their assets for return to victims. 2nd, we need to fortify electronic communication systems against abuse by working with telecommunication carriers, social media companies, and other digital internet service providers to detect and address illicit activity occurring on the communications and information services they provide. 3, we need to prevent victimization and assist victims through public education to aid Americans in avoiding falling victim to these schemes and assisting them when they do. Numerous organizations, particularly our state and local law enforcement partners, perform an essential role in this regard. Businesses that provide financial and communication services should do more to alert their users of their systems of suspicious activity and expeditiously work with victims and law enforcement to address this illicit activity and make victims whole. 4th, we need to disrupt the illicit financial networks by addressing substantial weaknesses that are enabling fraud and money laundering activities. 2 urgent priorities are to quickly correct weaknesses in common authentication practices and addressing the substantial illicit activity involving certain digital asset services that operate inconsistent with the guidelines of the International Financial Action Task Force and U.S. anti-money laundering laws. 5th, we need to improve our understanding of the problem by conducting regular surveys to better measure the scale and nature of fraud schemes and supporting the outstanding journalistic work and academic research on these challenges. Improving understanding of this problem is essential to motivating an effective international response. Congress has an essential role in furthering all 5 of these areas. For example, this committee has done important work in advancing the Combating Money Laundering and Cybercrime Act. Legislation like that, once enacted, will aid us in addressing the threat posed by transnational fraud. Further work remains to improve U.S. law enforcement's ability to combat transnational illicit activity involving digital assets. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. I've always enjoyed working with this committee and look forward to continuing that partnership as we work to combat transnational fraud schemes and related challenges. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Noyes. Mr. Rembrandt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. My name is Scott Rembrandt, and I'm a Deputy Assistant Secretary in our Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes of the Treasury Department. My office leads Treasury's anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, or AML-CFT for short, and sanctions functions. As a career civil servant, I've spent 15 years at the Department of Treasury, proudly working for administrations of both parties on a bipartisan issue, which is combating illicit finance. Virtual asset investment schemes have a devastating impact. They're ripping off our seniors, and they recently led to the implosion of a Kansas bank. Today, I would like to address 3 topics. 1, illicit finance risks associated with virtual asset investment scams and human trafficking. 2, how Treasury employs our resources and tools to address these risks. And 3, how Congress can help. Defrauded investors are not the only victims of many of these schemes, of which are only growing, as both the chair and my fellow panelists noted. Many of these individuals are also victims of human trafficking attracted by criminal networks using fake job advertisements. In addition to using virtual assets, which have already been discussed a bit, as a lure for victims, scammers also use virtual assets and virtual currency exchanges to launder the victims' funds. Scammers, like other illicit actors misusing virtual assets, often use virtual currency exchanges that do not play by the rules and jurisdictions that have inadequate or no rules. While there has been notable progress over the last half-decade, virtual assets and virtual currency exchanges continue to be poorly regulated and poorly supervised for AML-CFT in many countries across the globe, making our financial system less safe. According to a voluntary survey by the Financial Action Task Force, in fact, nearly 75% of countries that were surveyed had moderate or major failings in their AML-CFT regimes devoted to virtual assets. Exchanges in countries without effective AML-CFT frameworks have little incentive to implement sufficient AML-CFT controls and can provide safe haven for businesses that launder illicit proceeds, including the profits from investment scams, stealing from our seniors. The Treasury Department has been hard at work to stop criminals from moving funds generated from these crimes. I wanted to focus on 2 efforts today. First, how we work with foreign partners to level the international playing field for virtual assets and their exchanges. And second, how we use Treasury authorities to cut off criminal actors and their financial facilitators from the international financial system. The U.S. is co-leading critical work at the Financial Action Task Force to close gaps in implementation of the FATF standards, particularly for countries with substantial virtual asset activity. This has involved the FATF publicly identifying countries that have substantial virtual asset activity and also whether they have the right rules in place. The FATF is also working to connect these countries with technical assistance providers. Further, Treasury is committed to taking action to curb access to the international financial system for those that defraud American investors and perpetrate human rights abuses. Last week, Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control designated a Cambodian senator and tycoon. His name is Lee Ong Fat. He's one of the richest and most politically connected men in Cambodia. He was designated, his conglomerate was designated, as were some of the resorts that he controls. And they're designated under a global Magnitsky Sanctions Authority for their role in serious human rights abuses related to the treatment of trafficked workers forced to engage in virtual asset investment scams. Some of these victims at his hotels reported being beaten, tortured with electric shocks, or forced to pay hefty ransoms. Treasury will continue to work with law enforcement to investigate these cases like this and use our tools to disrupt this type of activity. We need Congress's help to do more In November 2023, Treasury submitted legislative proposals to Congress that would ensure that our tools are up to date. The proposals would strengthen Treasury's ability to impose AML-CFT or sanctions on businesses that offer services to Americans or are backed by the US dollar. These proposals will drive compliance and we believe will deter criminals seeking to scam our citizens. Finally, Treasury requires more resources to respond to virtual asset investment scams and also money laundering through virtual assets, and we look forward to working with Congress to obtain more resources. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this committee today. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rembrandt. With that, we go to Ms. West. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Luetkemeyer, Ranking Member Beatty, and distinguished members of this committee. My name is Erin West. I'm a Deputy District Attorney in Santa Clara County, California. I work for District Attorney Jeff Rosen and with the REACT Task Force, an elite group of local detectives focusing on cybercrime. I come before you today as a fellow American who is witnessing the single worst financial attack on individual people this country has ever experienced. I come before you as a local prosecutor representing the thousands of men and women in local and state law enforcement who lack the training, tools, and bandwidth to help those in their jurisdiction. I come before you as a human being who is emotionally depleted from hearing victim after victim tell me the same story and having to say to them, there is nothing I can do to help you. I come before you as a woman who has lost her voice from asking increasingly more loudly for the last 2 years for a national strategy and a whole of government collaboration, including local and state partners. We are at crisis level, and we must act today. In March 2022, my task force saw our first pig butchering case. A 30-year-old software engineer lost his entire net worth of $300,000. Our detectives traced a good chunk of that money to an overseas crypto exchange. We innovated and shoehorned our practice into existing law and were able to recover and return a good amount of those funds. And then we did it 25 more times until the criminals started moving that money faster than we could catch it. Along the way, we realized that crypto was how bad guys were moving money and that our state and local partners needed help protecting their victims. We built the Crypto Coalition, which now numbers nearly 2,000 state and local detectives, analysts, and prosecutors who share best practices and teach others how to do this important work. Today, I represent not only my county, but my state and local partners. And beyond that, I represent a group of volunteers from both public and private sectors, including stakeholders from around the world who are banding together to combat this criminality. In April of this year, I launched Operation Shamrock, which is already the world's largest coalition explicitly aimed at undermining the global pig butchering epidemic. Under psychological influence from scammers, victims are liquidating 401ks, draining children's college accounts, and taking lines of credit against their homes. Billions and billions of dollars are moving from American households directly into the hands of the criminals, Chinese organized crime syndicates. We cannot ignore the national security threat that this unprecedented offshore wealth transfer incurs. We are at crisis level, and we must act today. The enemy operates primarily from Southeast Asia, but with a global footprint now extending to the Middle East and Africa. These compounds are staffed in large part by human trafficked victims who have been led to believe they have been hired for a plush live-work office job. Instead, they are locked into facilities guarded by men with AK-47s and forced to scam. These syndicates hold unprecedented power over the region. The U.S. Institute of Peace and the UN Office of Drugs and Crime have estimated that revenue generated by this criminal industry comprises more than 40% of the GDP of Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. In Cambodia, this can be viewed as a state-run criminal enterprise with compounds owned by high-ranking officials. This disturbing status quo thrives on and will ultimately outwit a partial or disjointed international response. We lack a national strategy. We are siloed. As a nation, we have done very little to disrupt this criminal industry and to protect our citizens from the relentless threat that comes at them daily. We are at crisis, and we must act today. We lack a leader. Congress must mandate establishment of a scam czar, whose first job is to create a national task force on scams. The mandate, a national strategy that identifies bad actors, many of whom we already know, holds them accountable criminally, and uses sanctions to undermine their ability to participate in the American financial system. Our response to this national crisis is long overdue. We must act today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. West. All of you did a great job with your testimony. You stayed right at the 5-minute mark. We appreciate that. The ranking member of the full committee has arrived, and we defer to her for a statement, an opening statement of 1 minute. Ms. Waters, you're recognized. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Luetkemeyer and Ranking Member Beatty. Many people have been defrauded of their life savings by transnational criminal organizations that emotionally ensnare their victims in phony relationships and ultimately lure them into sham cryptocurrency investments known as confidence scams. These multi-billion-dollar crimes also rely on victims of trafficking who have been kidnapped solely to perpetrate the crime. We need more resources at our federal enforcement agencies to better protect Americans and to stop these crime syndicates. And so this is appalling that extreme MAGA Republicans are attacking our nation's law enforcement officers and working to implement the Project 2025 budget cuts, including by shutting down the government later this month, which will defund the police and other agencies responsible for pursuing these criminals. FBI, FinCEN, and other law enforcement bodies need the funding necessary to combat these deep relationship confidence schemes and other fraud. I yield back.
Gentlemen, ladies, time's expired. Well, that would go to the question portion of our hearing today, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank all of you for your testimony. It's been very compelling. We've got a situation here which is a sort of an unknown type of new threat to our citizens, their property, their life savings, and Ms. Daniels, the U.S. financial system has numerous safeguards in place to stop money laundering and the financing of terrorism. However, the victims of confidence scams are still able to wire significant amounts of money to foreign accounts. Oftentimes, the scammer prepares the victim to circumnavigate safeguards like suspicious activity reporting. What are the banks supposed to do when a victim they truly believe has been scammed out of their money, where they know the money is going someplace it's not supposed to be, and what some money is going to be used for? What do you suggest they do?
Representative, thank you so much. Chairman, thank you so much for the question. We share your concern. It's not straightforward, it's complex. This is why we spend a lot of our time and effort on educating the financial sector through our advisories, through our alert on this, so that the tellers on the front lines are able to still recognize this activity when it occurs and be able to report it so that law enforcement has that information. It's also important to educate the public overall. Recently, FinCEN partnered with the ABA to put out a public PSA, which a number of law enforcement agencies joined onto to raise awareness about this problem. So it's a multifaceted response based on awareness at the public level, as well as with financial institutions, and using a variety of public-private partnerships to work at recouping those funds and tracing the illicit proceeds.
Thank you for that. Mr. Noyes, thank you for being here. The U.S. Secret Service is not under this committee's jurisdictions here. Attendance Day speaks to the seriousness of this threat. I'd like to discuss the scale of the problem, which you identified at $40 billion. That's unbelievable. Does that include the human trafficking part of it too? I mean, that's just the monetary cost, I'm assuming.
Correct, Chairman. That's just the estimates of the revenue, and that's actually the U.S. Institutes of Peace estimate in terms
Okay,
of the revenue.
whenever you seize assets, how do you go about that? Do you get collaboration and cooperation from other countries, or is that just the assets that are here in this country? Walk us through how that takes place, because you said you seized over $1 billion, I think you said.
Yeah, that's fraud loss prevented, Chairman, which includes voluntary return of funds by financial institutions. So it's important to note, well, digital assets are a key role in these fraud schemes. Not all the transfers are occurring in digital assets. So it is encompassing wire transfers and traditional bank transfers. And so we're able to execute a number of seizures working with those financial institutions in the U.S. to recover those funds. Additionally, when it comes to digital asset service providers, to include ones that claim to be outside the U.S., they often voluntarily assist us in freezing funds and then returning them voluntarily based upon a seizure order we obtain in the United States, working with our prosecutors and courts.
Speaking of prosecutors, Ms. West, I'd like to follow up with you for a second here. You talked about a national task force, a national plan to be able to coordinate with a lot of different agencies. You've seen all the agencies working here in front of you today. Are they working pretty well together, number one?
What I'd love to see is, I'd love to see everybody sit at the same table and divide and conquer. When we are in this unprecedented time where we are being actively targeted by foreign organized crime syndicates, we have no choice but to sit down and divide and conquer. Each agency has their own skills and their own tools in their arsenal that they could use. In a conversation I was in yesterday at a training, I heard information about the FBI handling a piece of it that involves the investigatory piece where the Secret Service could handle the seizing of assets. I think that there are plenty of opportunities to do just that. There are so many ways to attack this. We can start taking down websites. We can disrupt it by looking at their infrastructure. What we need to do is divide and conquer, and we need to collaborate better than we are.
Real quickly, Mr. Rembrandt, in working with some of the different entities, especially I'm sure the Googles of the world, the Microsofts of the world with regards to information going back and forth, these queries being made by these folks from overseas, are these companies working with you pretty well to stop this stuff, or are they just kind of blowing you off and saying, no, you don't, that's private information you shouldn't be in the middle of?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. I think that question is probably best addressed to law enforcement, since Treasury Department's primary interlocutors will be with financial institutions. So to the extent that these firms have payment platforms or regulated financial institutions, we, FinCEN and others, engage with them to get their feedback on what efforts they're taking.
Thank you. We'll get back to that later then. My time has expired. Then we go to the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To all, to all the witnesses. I understand that 90%, if not more, of these scams involve the bad actors requesting that the victims obtain and send funds in the form of cryptocurrency and through cryptocurrency wallets and exchanges. Why cryptocurrency, and why do you think that's the case? We can just go down the line quickly.
You want to start with Dara?
Or anyone.
Sure. Thank you so much. So cryptocurrency, cryptocurrency, like any financial instrument, can be exploited and is exploited for illicit use. There are certain aspects of it that make it appealing for its exploitation by criminals. Those include the speed of transactions and their global nature. On the flip side, at the very same time, there are attributes that make it easier to trace and interdictable by law enforcement, by authorities, but these require a compliant AML-CFT framework across all jurisdictions, because otherwise we have a problem that we like to refer to as jurisdictional arbitrage.
Okay, anyone want to add anything to that?
I'm sorry, I would. Thank you for the question. What we know about cryptocurrency is that it is fast and that it is incomprehensible to a lot of victims. And so what they are preying on in these situations is they are creating a dream for our citizens. They are creating this dream that you can fall in love, you can find this person, you can have this person that is showing you an elevated lifestyle, and that you too can achieve it. And our victims don't understand that. They don't understand crypto.
Okay, we're going to stay with you, Ms. West. You and your office, the Santa Clara County Prosecutor's Office, have done pioneering work on both prosecuting these deep relationship confidential schemes and in creating interagency and public-private collaboration platforms to help educate and pursue these crimes. First, let me congratulate you on that work, because I've been a long champion of financial literacy, and I currently serve along with Congresswoman Kim as the co-chairs of the Financial Literacy and Wealth Creation Caucus. Should financial institutions play a bigger role in fraud prevention, and is there anything else we could do?
Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important piece of this. What we know is that everybody has got to do better. When we look at the life cycle of pig butchering, we can look at a lot of areas that need to do better, from social media, needing to get people off their platforms so they can't meet our victims, from banking, making it more difficult for bad actors to encourage our victims. We could implement a law similar to what is waiting for the governor's signature in California that slows where a banker suspects that there is fraud behind the transfer, the banker can hold the transfer for 3 days. It also includes a trusted contact, and that is someone that could be contacted in the event that the banks believe there's fraud. There's opportunity here for everybody to improve what they're doing.
Thank you. We'll go to you, Mr. Rembrandt. I understand that sanctions have been imposed in relation to relationship confidential scams. How effective have these sanctions been, and what else do you think what else has Treasury been doing to counter these growing fraud schemes?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. As I noted in my testimony, we recently took action related to a Cambodian senator and oligarch. And I was meant to send a signal to him, his business enterprises, and his country that real action needs to be taken to stop these scams that are ripping off U.S. persons. Over the last couple of years, Treasury has used sanctions against 30 individuals or entities that have touched upon human trafficking types of crime, and we believe that they have had a big impact in signaling specific jurisdictions to individuals, and most importantly, their banks, that they can no longer continue profiting off of these crimes. As it relates to the most recent designation, it's too soon to tell, since it was just last week, but I've talked to Cambodian authorities to make clear they need to take action to investigate, prosecute, and
Let me ask you this, because my time is getting ready to run out. Do you think that are more authorities needed for Treasury to go after these transnational financial fraudsters?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Lady yields back. That goes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, who is chairman of the Small Business Committee. Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here today. The United States Secret Service was originally established in 1895 to combat the rise in counterfeit money. It wasn't until after the assassination of President William McKinley that the Secret Service shifted focus to protecting the president and his family, which was later expanded to include protecting former presidents and president-elects. After the Department of Homeland Security was established, the Secret Service was transferred from the Department of Treasury to the new Department of Homeland Security in 2003. The rise in financial crimes today and 2 recent attempts on President Trump's life reiterates our need to re-examine the structure of the Secret Service, and that is why I've introduced a bill for the last few Congresses to transfer the Secret Service from the Department of Homeland Security back to its original home in Treasury to ensure the U.S. and the Secret Service is functioning as efficiently and effectively as possible. So, Mr. Noyes, the Secret Service has a unique dual mission of protection and financial investigations. Does the protection mission distract from your investigative mission or vice versa? And do you think the Secret Service is able to give the appropriate attention to both of these important missions?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. My experience is that they enhance each other. The skills our investigators develop investigating crimes is critical to our protection work, whether that's investigating a threat that's occurring online, illicit cyber activity, use of cryptocurrency, which was one of the things highlighted in Department of Justice's charges against the IRGC a couple years back. They enhance each other. And the second critical thing to keep in mind is the very variable nature of our protection requirements. Campaigns come every 4 years. We need to have the trained personnel to assist in that. As Director Murray, former director of the Secret Service, said, we have two dragons at the Secret Service, two demanding, highly challenging missions. And that's ensuring the protection of those we're charged with protect and safeguarding the integrity of the financial system. Both remain foremost priorities for this nation that we work on every day.
After having realized they are victims of a romantic or confidence scam, individuals often do not know how to turn to or if and how they're able to recover the money that was stolen from them. They return to law enforcement, who in some cases are unable to help them. Often they are too ashamed to report the crime. One agency that has had success in combating this crime is the Secret Service, who has arrested Chinese nationals for their roles in these scams and recovered over $1 billion in financial fraud. So again, Mr. Noyes, could you walk us through how the Secret Service tracks down these criminals, and what tools or methods do you find to be the most successful? $1 billion is a lot of money.
It is, Congressman. Thank you. We are proud of the work. The heart of it is our partnerships with our state and local and our other law enforcement partners. We train and equip many of them at their National Computer Forensics Institute. That equips them with the skills they need to work directly with the victims of these crimes and then turn to us to assist in the asset recovery and extending their reach to pursue those actors outside of the United States, which may be beyond their capacity as local law enforcement to do. I also want to note the critical role of our partners at Treasury, because particularly it's challenging in this context where the fraud victim is unaware, but if we are alerted to a fraudulent transaction within a few days of it occurring, we nearly at 100% rate recover those funds. And so that speed of reporting is essential, and why it's so critical that the victims of these crimes work with their financial institutions, work with the law enforcement in their communities to report that quickly, because that gives us the best shot at recovering their funds.
Okay, in the time I have left, there's multiple victims involved in these scams, and those that are being stolen from, but also those who are forced to carry out the scamming. These crime syndicates based on China and across Southeast Asia have been luring victims to their compounds and promises of much employment, but upon their arrival, these individuals have their passports taken and forced into carrying out scams under threat of torture, starvation, or the rest, or safety of their families. And many of these operations are located across Southeast Asia where law enforcement is lacking, armed conflict runs rampant, and there's no authority. So sadly, the Chinese government has done very little to disrupt and combat these organizations so quickly, and lets them allow to grow in size and influence and continues to attack innocent Americans. So, Mr. Rembrandt, could you elaborate more on the human trafficking side of these scams, and what the role does China play in allowing or enabling the trafficking to occur, and how's the U.S. government working to disrupt these scam camps? I got a small amount of time, so you hit those. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. By some estimates, there's 200,000 at least human trafficking victims working in scam centers in Southeast Asia. Chinese nationals have been some of the biggest facilitators of these scams, and Chinese nationals have been some of the greatest victims of online scams in China. I think my answer of how we can work better with China on this, one, we need to make clear to the neighboring jurisdictions and China that's unacceptable, these online scam centers, and they need to take action. Two, we need to encourage China to make major reforms to their own AML CFT system. And three, we need to be willing to share information on money laundering and virtual assets that may be emanating or connected to China with the Chinese, and see and demand they take action.
My time is up. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired, but that would go to the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters from California, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Daniels. Acting Comptroller of the Currency, Michael Hsu, recently encouraged the U.S. to require financial institutions that facilitate authorized but fraudulently induced payments by victims to scammers to share liability and reimburse harmed consumers. He explained that this approach will incentivize firms to strengthen their systems to prevent this kind of fraud. Indeed, 9 of the UK's largest banks have done just that, improving their technology to more effectively identify fraudulent schemes and warn customers before they send the money. That's why I worked with Senators Blumenthal and Warren to introduce a bill, H.R. 9303, the Protecting Consumers from Payment Scams Act, which would adopt this common sense requirement in the United States to better protect consumers from payment scams. Whether scammers are moving money via crypto or Venmo or other means, consumers deserve to be protected. Now, I understand that these payment scams are becoming more sophisticated, with bad actors using artificial intelligence and social engineering to gain the victim's trust. This includes deep relationship, confidence schemes, where the criminals are coaxing the target by befriending, even romancing the victims over many months before they suggest the final transactions. No matter how it starts, all of these scams end with the bad actor enticing the victims to authorize the withdrawal and transmission of funds to the scammer. So, Ms. Daniels, are these types of fraud schemes being reported to FinCEN? If so, what trends are you seeing in the Bank Secrecy Act data that, with respect to payment scams, including the deep relationship confidence scams that we're discussing here today?
Representative, thank you so much, Chairman, for your question. We at FinCEN are seeing filings come in from financial institutions. We've been engaging them on these through a variety of advisories and alerts. To date, from our alert on this very type of scheme that we're discussing today, we've seen over 9,000 come in, and more come in every single day and every single week. This is also representative of a broader fraud problem that we're observing. We also observe quite a very large number of filings that come in under our elder financial exploitation advisory that we put out a long time ago in terms of 2 years ago, and then years before that. We have hundreds of thousands of filings that we're working through and learning typologies from them so that we can promote education, stop them, as well as get out leads and help investigators. So this is part of a broader fraud trend that we're seeing and we're working on. We've put out 3 financial trend analyses on fraud for the public this year, and we just continue to work with our partners in public-private partnerships, as well as with law enforcement, and as well as just across the range of government to stem this issue.
Are you familiar with the bill that I just referenced earlier in my presentation that I worked with Mr. Blumenthal on?
So I'm not familiar with enough of the aspects of that bill to be able to speak to that today, but I'm going to take that back, and we will definitely get back to you with some more developed thoughts on it.
Well, it seems to me like there could be better communication between the federal government and financial institutions, or perhaps among financial institutions, so that when a bad actor is identified, that information is quickly shared with other institutions, similar to check kiting alerts. This could help banks to know if their own customers are also sending money to the same bad actors, allowing the banks to warn the victims. And so, what information sharing programs or authorities exist today to raise the alarm about these financial scams? What else might be needed to further improve that communication to better spot and combat these schemes? I appreciate what you just said. Anything else?
Thank you. Yeah, we are engaged in public-private partnerships in line with what it sounds like is in the bill, but we are going to get back to you, and we share your concerns and support the overall notion of educating and more partnership on this. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for being here today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. That would go to the gentleman from Georgia. Mr. Loudermilk is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the panel, thank you all for being here. This is a huge problem, and it's a lot of people probably don't know how big it is until you know someone who has been a victim of this, which our family, a very close friend of our family, their widowed mother, was scammed by this and lost just about all of her retirement funds because of it. And at my office, we're inundated with calls, and it seems to be mostly senior citizens on fixed incomes. And so with that, Mr. Noyes, let me start with you. As I alluded to, that it seems like a lot of the victims, especially in Georgia, are elderly individuals on fixed incomes, but we've also heard that most victims are targeted from stolen data sets, from large-scale data breaches. And these can be thousands or even millions of records. Other than age and income, are there other factors that criminals use to target the victims of data breaches?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. We certainly see heavy impact on elderly persons. A lot of data indicates they are suffering the highest financial losses, which is particularly tragic when they are retired and are on a fixed income. It is not limited to them, though. We see it impacting younger individuals. It really affects anyone seeking love and connection that uses electronic messaging.
Okay.
And so that is very encompassing victim demographic.
Are there steps that victims of data breaches can take to kind of minimize their risk or protect themselves from falling victim to a confidence scam?
Yes, Congressman. The most important one is to freeze their credit. That has some of the most impactful, lasting impacts on individuals, and so that can help them to a large extent. Second, if their financial institution offers something like a trusted contact, like a family member that can be contacted if they suspect fraud, that can also assist in avoiding these situations.
I appreciate that. I know that a lot of times family members will try to intervene, but once they're hooked, and they can't talk sense to them. Ms. West, let me ask you, on a local level, do you agree with Mr. Noyes' assessment of the typical victim profile that's not just elderly, it's younger, and about the steps to protect yourself as well?
Thank you so much for the question. Absolutely. What we're seeing is that victims can be of any age. Recently, I had a 25-year-old woman call me, and she had lost everything she had. The specific nature of pig butchering is that it doesn't stop until the scammer has taken every last penny from the victim, just like you described. And so not only do we see young people, but we do also, I had a 68-year-old woman reach out to me and tell me that she had to go to back to work after she lost all of her retirement. And worse yet, we're seeing suicides. And we're seeing suicides where the adult child finds that their father has killed himself. They don't know why until they start going through their father's paperwork afterward and realize that he's lost the entire family fortune. It's been stolen from him in a pig butchering event.
Wow. And I'm sure that you guys can attest to this, that family members that do try to intervene, as long as the victim is considered competent, there's nothing they can do to protect them. But let me throw this out to anybody on the panel. So a lot of this perceivably comes from data breaches. Is there any way that we can backtrack to determine if the scammer did get the information from a large-scale data breach? And I'll open that up to anyone. Mr. Noyes?
Yes, Congressman, in some cases we can, but the tragic reality is so much data about Americans is available to criminals, particularly older individuals, essentially anyone that had a credit report prior to 1998. That data is available to criminals. And so that is a large swath of America, and we have to change our paradigm around identity and authentication to not rely on static pieces of information, because those are known to the criminal underground and available for exactly these sorts of schemes.
Anyone else?
I would just say that if anybody in this room has received one of those phishing texts just saying, hey, can we play golf this weekend, we know how ubiquitous this is.
Right.
And we know that even if they come from data breaches, they're still coming at us every which way from Sunday. And so we really need to be educating that we can no longer trust any inbound digital communication we did not request.
So to close this out, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true, right? I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. With that, we go to the gentleman from North Carolina. Mr. Nickel is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much. Thanks to our witnesses for being here today. I'm glad that our committee is examining deep relationship confidence schemes. These crimes target our constituents and cause financial devastation for working families. We've got to do everything we can to protect the innocent people falling prey to these scams. Ms. West, first question to you. What kind of awareness building efforts might help potential victims from being exposed to or falling for these deep relationship confidence schemes?
We need to be shouting this from the rooftops. We need to be talking this to the person in the seat next to us on an airplane. We need to be telling people that we're standing next to at the soccer pitch. What is happening is we have been declared war upon by foreign adversaries, and they have weaponized the financial system against us. So we've got to spread this any way we can. I've done a unique thing with Operation Shamrock, and last week I trained 200 volunteers on, here is a slide deck. Go present this at your local library, your local community center. We know that education isn't the only thing that's going to fix this, but there is no reason why we can't start using the number of people who are really dramatically concerned about this and put them to work telling their local constituents about this.
Thanks so much. I think Mr. Loudermilk certainly said it well. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's a great place to start with this, but we need to ensure that we're accurately measuring the problem. There are several reporting work streams managed by the federal government, state governments, and our consumer advocate partners. Establishing a central repository to report and share information would certainly be a powerful tool to help us analyze the data, share best practices, and focus our efforts as a team. The governments of Australia and the UK reported declines in fraud last year, likely as a result of centralized scam reporting. Mr. Rembrandt, to you, how do you think a centralized tracking tool could help us cut down on these types of scams?
Thank you, Congressman. And I believe you represent Wake County and Cary, is that right?
Yep.
So my parents moved to Cary 30 years ago, and I was down there this weekend for my mom's birthday. And they reminded me that one parent started working at age 13, the other started working at 15. And I frankly find few things more repellent than ripping off our seniors. And there's more that we can do to combat scams like this. There are data sets throughout the US government as relates to fraud against Americans, which is our greatest predicate crime, generates the most illicit proceeds. They underpin a series of reports by our office and others. And I think personally, we would benefit from increased centralization in terms of tracking fraud throughout is collected by all government agencies. We'd obviously have to take a look at the specifics, but any way we can consolidate more information that we can operationally take action against fraud, I'm all for it.
Thanks so much. And please give your parents my best. Tell them, if they need anything, my office is here to help. Mr. Noyes, to you, we're on track to be one of the least productive Congresses in our nation's history. We're less than 2 weeks away from a federal government shutdown. If we don't pass a continuing resolution, I've often asked for what the toll is for the folks who work for the federal government when we continue to have these CRs over and over and over, the cost to the taxpayer, the lack of efficiency and productivity, because we continue to inflict the lack of productivity and the chaos and confusion here in the House on the taxpayers. As we look at the important work that you do with the Secret Service, how important is it for TFI to have ongoing operations, as we continue to look at yet another CR coming, hopefully within days?
Thank you. You rightly note a lapse in appropriations is certainly highly disruptive. The Secret Service, most people continue to work without pay in the event of a lapse of appropriations, so it's not as impactful in that regard as it is to other agencies where people are prohibited from working. A continuing resolution also slows our operations. It hinders our hiring and bringing on board new personnel that has a long ripple effect in terms of their career pipeline and bringing on new talent. It stalls our procurements. It stalls equipping our state and local partners with the tools and resources they need to do this work. So all of those are a significant impact to our personnel.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has been yielded back. With that, we go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Muser is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to our witnesses on this important subject. I'd like to start by acknowledging the important work our regulators and law enforcement do at all levels, state, local, and federal, do to combat fraud and scams as well. Financial institutions do play a significant role using their tools and safeguards to protect their customers from financial crimes. In Pennsylvania alone, consumers lost $158 million to scams in the first 9 months of 2023, over a 20% increase from the previous year. Digital assets, however, particularly stable coins, have built-in mechanisms to combat fraud, as you probably know. And these tools can freeze fraudulent transactions instantly, which is something that we certainly need to be discussing more. Mr. Rembrandt, if I may, I'll start with you. Financial transactions have become mostly digital. Financial institutions have developed a range of tools to protect consumers and create lines of defense against fraud. Do you agree that there has been a significant effort by the private sector, and significant investment actually, to protect their customers and prevent fraud?
So in the United States, thank you for your question, Congressman. In the United States, we are facing an epidemic of fraud through digital and all other means. There's no question that financial institutions in the U.S. writ large have stepped up a lot with their efforts over the last number of years to help identify, report, and stop frauds. But it is a different story in many jurisdictions around the world that may lack the same legal frameworks, the lack of enforcement, the lack of regulation, the lack of supervision, the lack of any action.
How do you go about identifying fraud quickly, working with financial institutions, informing consumers about risks, and preventing people from falling prey to these fraudsters? Mr. Rembrandt.
So at the Treasury Department, how we most likely are to hear about fraud is when financial institutions report suspicious transactions to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And they may also hear directly from law enforcement that these activities have occurred.
Ms. Daniels, can you answer that question?
Sure, thank you. So FinCEN has a variety of methods of engaging with the public, particularly when it comes to quickly recouping funds. If federal law enforcement is notified in a quick manner, as was outlined earlier by my colleague, Mr. Noyes, FinCEN has a program called the Rapid Response Program, where if funds are going overseas, we can work with our network of other financial intelligence units as part of the Egmont Group across the globe to recoup funds related to cyber-enabled crimes. And to date, over the past 10 years, while that program has been ongoing, we've been very successful and have been able to recoup over $1 billion in funds.
Turning to the digital assets, stablecoin operators have worked with law enforcement to freeze accounts engaged in fraud in order to recover money for victims. What do you see as the role of cooperation between regulators and stablecoin issuers in combating such financial scams? Ms. Daniels.
So I'd like to defer to my colleague, Mr. Rembrandt. I know that there's legislative proposals, and the department has sent forward a term sheet which outlines our thoughts on a number of items related to virtual assets. I believe stablecoins is included.
Do you think stablecoin usage in the U.S. would allow for more effective tracing and targeting of scammers? And Mr. Rembrandt or Ms. Daniels?
So in terms of tracing and targeting, stablecoins, like other types of cryptocurrencies, are a type of financial instrument that we can trace and help us in terms of being able to conduct investigations. They have that capability along with other cryptocurrencies.
Okay. On the local level, Ms. West, what do you think would be particularly applicable on a national scale? What you're doing on the Operation Shamrock, for instance, because we're hearing more and more about this, right? I mean, they tried to scam me, and they were somewhat successful, actually, unfortunately, one time. So are we informing local businesses? Are people aware of who to contact when this occurs? Maybe you could talk, I'm out of time, but about Operation Shamrock, and is that applicable to on a national scale? And I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, so maybe we could follow up on that in writing or afterwards.
Thank you.
I yield back. Thank you.
Jim yields back. Yes, we can follow up with a letter to the individual and ask for the questions to be responded to that way. Next, we have the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Pedersen, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here for this really important conversation. I represent Colorado's 7th Congressional District. We have a higher percentage of seniors, and we know that they're being targeted at an exponential rate. Something that is heartbreaking when you think about romance scams, where you're going after people who are vulnerable, who are putting themselves out there looking for love. To you, Ms. West, you talked about getting people off of our platforms. And last year, I introduced a bill to make sure that our dating platforms are actually notifying folks who have been in contact with individuals who have been taken off their platforms, who they have identified as being problematic for whatever reasons, that they actually had to notify them, because many times it moves from a dating site to, talking over the phone. This is hopefully going to eventually pass, but it's a very small step. Can you say more about what we can do to get people who are problematic off our platforms and how we notify folks?
Thank you for that question, and thank you so much for your leadership in understanding that that is a major factor. Recently, specifically with the dating app, I think it's super important to be notifying other people who've come into contact with that scammer. Also, too, we should be doing that with social media. Recently, I dealt with another suicide, and in that suicide, I then went to the social media site, scrolled up, I could see that that profile was still active with 50 men who looked strikingly, as friends, who looked strikingly like my suicide victim. And so when I reached out to that social media app, I said, and can you please notify everyone else who is in contact with this facade of a woman that is actually driving people to kill themselves? And that wasn't a promise that could be made to me. So I think that we need to keep pushing forward aggressively when we are talking about people losing their lives to scammers.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Noyes, you talked about, some additional steps we could take around freezing credit when we identify that somebody might be vulnerable to some of these scams, or if we had allowed for trusted contact, if we would be able to contact them if we identified somebody as maybe being taken advantage of. Do you think that some of these, or maybe I'm identifying it to the wrong person, but do you think that we should mandate that some of these steps are taken with our financial institutions?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think whether to mandate is not a call for me. As a policy director at the Secret Service, steps like that are extremely impactful and driving that cross-sector collaboration between social media companies, financial institutions to identify indicators of fraud and take steps to prevent fraud loss, I do think would have a substantial impact. And so looking at what further steps can be taken to drive that collaboration, or where they feel that there's an inhibitor to that collaboration. We do hear from financial institution employees that they feel they cannot stop a transaction even though they reasonably believe there's fraud involved. And so addressing those sorts of views to make sure they understand that, yes, if you reasonably suspect fraud is occurring, you can delay that transaction, I think would be an impactful step.
Great. And then, Mr. Rembrandt, I think that actually I was going to ask you those specific follow-ups as well. And if you could talk about what the impacts are when you actually go through, you talked about what happened in Cambodia. What are the impacts of these sanctions to both the victims, but also stopping some of the crime networks?
The impact of sanctions as it relates to human trafficking and also the misuse of virtual assets, be it related to human trafficking or otherwise, is not only to signal this is an issue, two is to signal to the individual, their entities, and the country that this is a major problem, that action needs to be taken, and three, it requires U.S. financial institutions to freeze their assets. And most banks around the world will not want to interact with that person anymore because they're concerned about their exposure to U.S. sanctions. So it has the ability to cut them off from the international financial system.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. That would go to the gentleman from Iowa. Mr. Nunn is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for joining us today. We already know this, but in my home state of Iowa, this is happening right in the heart of the heartland. Scammers are preying on retirees and their hard-earned life savings. Just last year, the Iowa Attorney General Office received over 13,000 financial fraud reports, adding up to over $43 million in losses. Concerningly, many of these scams are perpetrated by organized networks, some allegedly managed by Chinese criminals who use slave labor and gangs to enforce this around the world. Law enforcement does have a crucial advantage here in the United States against these criminals. It's something called blockchain technology, which we're going to talk about today. I want to highlight that in November, the Department of Justice, using blockchain, froze approximately $225 million linked to international human trafficking syndicates in Southeast Asia responsible for pig butchering scams, those cyber-related scams that go after particularly vulnerable citizens, including our seniors right in Iowa. Many state and local law enforcement officials, though, feel overwhelmed. As has been highlighted today, they have limited capability to help these victims, which lead to many crimes going unsolved. Tragically, one of those victims was a fellow veteran. John Gerald lost nearly $200,000 to these scams, and when he went to law enforcement, they basically said, "We can't help you." That is unacceptable across the board. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to submit Mr. Gerald's testimony for the record.
Without objection?
This is also why I have been working diligently on legislation to help prevent that. We have introduced the bipartisan Empowering Law Enforcement to Combat Financial Fraud Act. This bill would allow state and local law enforcement to use funding for blockchain technology to combat financial fraud, to help investigation, and to stop pig butchering scams. This is common sense legislation, Mr. Chair. It helps provide justice to the victims, stops the threat and the bleed off of money, and it's been supported by the AARP, the Financial Technology Association, the Digital Chamber, and law enforcement, including the Iowa State Police Association and the National Police Association. I'm grateful for their help. So let's get started with this incredibly impressive panel. Ms. West, alarmingly, older adults are bearing the brunt of these scams, suffering significantly higher financial losses. In 2021 alone, the median loss for individuals over the age of 70, nearly $10,000, money they can ill afford to lose. These losses can be significant in their ability to take care of themselves, particularly on fixed incomes. Your work as a district attorney is on the front lines of fighting these scams, and thank you for being in charge on this. What additional tools are needed to fight these increasingly sophisticated techniques perpetrated on our senior citizens?
We need a national leader, we need a team to support that leader, and we need a plan. And the plan has to start with, we are going to do better about collecting data. We are going to provide victims with one location to report instead of the 17 locations that they report today. I had the benefit of being in a major newspaper yesterday, which is excellent. But what happened is today now my email box is flooded. And like you, I received an email from Brian who said that he reported to the Maryland State Police, and the chief of police told him that they can't investigate this because there are too many of these cases. We need to ratchet up the volume on what is happening on the ground level. What we are having over and over is victims reporting to local law enforcement, not getting any help. Victims reporting to federal law enforcement, not even hearing anything back. And that isn't acceptable. There's a much better way to do this, and it's a divide and conquer method where we immediately triage, as my colleagues are telling you. Some things are recoverable if we get on them right that second. We need to immediately triage. We need a second bucket where we are building out these cases in the way we can. We need a better collection system that is collecting the WhatsApp handle, the Facebook profile, so that we can overlay them and give the pieces of work out once we figure it out. We can have different agencies handling different pieces of this. Let's take down all of those profiles, let's take down all those URLs, and let's actually start to move the needle forward. I also appreciate that you call it pig butchering, because when we call this 87 different things, what you get is data that's actually not all that helpful to you. You're hearing data even from this panel that talks about all kinds of different frauds. Pig butchering is killing this country.
Ms. West, I appreciate that you have a dedicated plan. We intend to fight fire with this. I hope this legislation moves in the right direction. Thank you for the panel being here. Let's go get them. With that, I yield my time, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, we go to the gentleman from Illinois. Mr. Foster is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Luetkemeyer, and thank you to our witnesses for protecting them, doing your best to protect Americans from these sort of financial crimes. You know, I recently had a heartbreaking meeting with an elderly couple, constituents in my district, who had their life savings wiped out by one of the bewildering arrays of this kind of scam. But before I move on, I'd like to recognize the work of the DuPage County, Illinois State's Attorney's Office and the DuPage County IT Department, who in May of this year, jointly with the Secret Service, shut down more than 350 fake investment websites being used to facilitate these scams. They estimate that these efforts spared nearly 18,000 potential victims from visiting the phony websites. And I thank them for their service, and Mr. Noyes, please transmit my thanks to your colleagues in the Secret Service. I'd also like to highlight again the centrality of anonymous self-hosted crypto to this fraud. Mr. Rembrandt, you note in your testimony that 85% of reported losses involve virtual assets. A financial crimes detective in Naperville, Illinois, a city in my district, was recently asked what makes it so difficult when some victim says to him, well, I gave them the money in Bitcoin. And he responded by saying, well, it's just how fast that money can kind of disperse. That money is basically there instantly. Isn't like a wire transfer that takes some time. That money could be 8 or 9 or 10 different wallets by the end of the day. You know, for the last couple of years, Naperville, Illinois has been the #1 safest city in the United States. And it's disheartening to see that even they are outgunned and unable to protect our residents from these crypto-enabled scams. This article also goes on quoting that officer as mentioning that more and more of the crimes he's seeing involve Bitcoin ATMs. What role are these playing in these scams, both in making the payments and in laundering them subsequently? Mr. Noyes, do you want to have a swing at that?
Yes, thank you, Congressman, and I will pass your thanks on to our office. They do great work there with their partners in your state. The digital assets absolutely do play a foundational role, right? The ability to move large amounts of value transnationally, irrevocably, instantaneously is a fundamental difference. Previously, transnational criminal organizations would struggle to move similar amounts of value through the financial system or through bulk cash smuggling or other money laundering.
So what you're saying, we often hear that, oh, well, if it's legal with cash, it should be legal with crypto. And so the difference, the fundamental difference, is the speed of escape from the scene of the crime. That you very seldom see ransomware demanding $100,000 of cash and in a grocery bag and a trash can in Central Park or wherever you do the drop. It is much easier to use the crypto as the instantaneous means of transfer, and that's the difference between crypto and cash that we all have to internalize on this. Now, it strikes me also that identity fraud is at the heart of almost all of these scams, and it's getting worse with deepfake AI impersonations. The internet is rapidly filling up with AI-generated trash and fraudulent AI-generated content. I doubt almost any of us even reads the content of our spam filter anymore. And as a member of Congress, we have really sophisticated phishing attempts that target us. And so I believe that a great deal of this could be prevented if Americans had a reliable means of proving they are who they say they are, authenticating their ability online, and the identities of other transacting parties. The EU is doing this. Within a year or two, every EU citizen will have a way of proving in an online environment that they are a legally traceable, extraditable person. And that will provide a tremendous, if you're engaging in social media and someone's willing to authenticate themselves as a legally traceable individual, you don't know don't need to know who they are, but you need to know if you get scammed that you can go to a court, de-anonymize them, extradite them if you need to, and drag them into court. Do you have any comments on the potential benefits of having a similar secure digital identity available to U.S. citizens? Any one of you? Sure.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. After this hearing, I'm going to board an airplane using my digital mobile driver's license, and I can get on an airplane, but I can't necessarily get a bank account with the same Virginia mobile driver's license. I think you're right that identity theft is rampant in the United States, and trustworthy, secure, privacy-protecting digital ID could make a big difference in combating money laundering, fraud, and potentially facilitating financial inclusion as well. So I think we would welcome efforts to further facilitate the acceptance of trustworthy digital ID by financial institutions.
Thank you. And if there's something we can do to help all of you, that would be number one on my list. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, go to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. De La Cruz, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before us. As our population ages, more and more people are falling victims to the scam industry, and it is an industry often involving transnational criminal organizations working in areas of weak governance and employing people who have been human trafficked. As our population continues to age and technology grows more prevalent, the ability for criminals to reach into the lives of our loved ones as they sit in their living room also grows. That being said, it is a commitment of mine to protect our seniors, to protect their hard-earned Social Security and retirement savings, and we also must protect our seniors from devastating ramifications of these scams. Question is to Ms. West. No one wants a member of their family to fall victim to one of these schemes and lose their life savings. Is there anything that families can look out for or conversations that you suggest having with our more mature family members to help ensure that they do not fall victim to these scams when they're home alone?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your leadership in protecting seniors. What I recommend about advising seniors about scams is the same advice I give friends who have teenage boys when I talk about sextortion, is you need to normalize having these conversations. You need to normalize having that conversation with the senior and letting them know what is out there that is coming from them. We need to have a national conversation about those texts that you are receiving on your phone are nefarious. Those are coming from human trafficked people who are getting beaten when you don't respond. Don't respond to them. People need to understand the whole context of what's happening. So when we think about our seniors, we need to explain the context of what is coming from them, that there are bad actors who are looking to engage with them. And we also need to start looking out for what happens when our seniors isolate. Our enemy is playing a very sophisticated mind game, and they know how to lure seniors and really anyone into these romance scams. And so we need to watch out for people being isolated, people not sharing information that they once did, people hiding their phones, because those are the things that are telltale signs that our loved one is involved in something like this and is way over their head.
So if we do have a loved one that is over their head, they are being scammed or have been scammed, how do they report it?
What we tell everyone is that you need to report to your local police department. And when I frequently teach chiefs of police about this, and I'll say, how many of you think you have a cryptocurrency problem? And nobody ever raises your hand. And I say, no, you don't, because they're coming to my task force because you're not seeing it. They're not reporting to you, and at the front gate, people are throwing those in the garbage. So we need to keep reporting to our local police departments so that they know how big this problem is and they allocate appropriate resources. They need to report to IC3. IC3 is the best way for us to establish how massive this problem is so that resources are allocated appropriately.
And for those listening, what is IC3?
Oh, thank you. It is the internet, it's IC3. It's the FBI's portal where you can report internet crime.
It's the Internet Crime Complaint Center.
Thank you to my colleague.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. Mr. Noyes, look, I live in a border district, and my constituents understand the catastrophe of human trafficking and how it destroys the lives of many people. It disturbs me that trafficking victims are being used to commit these crimes. How is our government working to disrupt human trafficking element, or the human trafficking element involved in some of these scam operations?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. Countering human trafficking is not a core investigative responsibility of the Secret Service, but we counter the underlying financial nexus, the money laundering networks, the fraud that is fueling that, and the economic incentive to traffic in these individuals. We work closely with our partners at Homeland Security Investigations that actually rescue human trafficking victims, repatriate them, and help them in that regard. And I would highlight the State Department just published their Trafficking in Persons report this summer. It has detailed recommendations by every country, to include the United States, of steps that need to be taken to address particularly this type of human trafficking in terms of digital services, online fraud, that I highly recommend taking a look at and taking action on.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. With that, go the gentleman from California. The distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing. I think it's been very important. I thank the ranking member also, and of course all those witnesses here today. This issue, of course, affects every district in the United States, including my district. A few years back, we had a woman who was sending love letters back and forth with someone they thought wasn't far away. It turns out they were in Nigeria, and she lost so much of her money. And again, a real tragic situation. So again, the things that we've been talking about today, these victims, is very pertinent to every community. However, I have to be honest with you, I'm a little confused maybe on the discussion of crypto. It seems a little schizophrenic here. You have some people saying it's a real good thing because then you can trace it. And you have others saying, I want to quote so I don't get anybody wrong, it says, that's the way the bad guys move the money. So is crypto good? Is crypto bad in this situation?
Well, I think it can be both. I think that crypto is how bad guys move money, but I think that the fact that we can trace cryptocurrency on the blockchain gives us a unique ability to follow where this money went. Now, just because we can trace it doesn't always mean that we can seize it. It would have to be in certain locations where we have access to be able to seize it. But it's not crypto that's the problem here. Crypto is the means that's being used. Right now, cryptocurrency is being used for bad guys to move money. It's being part of the international money laundering system, and so there's a lot of concern about it. But crypto is being used in a number of other ways that are not illicit.
Okay. Someone else? Secret Service?
I'd agree. Aaron said it well. We've described it as similar to the highway system, that criminals use highways does not make highways bad, but it does mean you need to train and equip law enforcement to address criminal activity moving on these highways. And so that is the key element here, is that there is a new financial system that allows the movement of high amounts of value, and we need to keep pace to ensure law enforcement has the ability to still enforce the law, still recover assets for victims of crime. And there's important steps to be taken in that regard. Most notably that the Department of Justice recommended in their legislative proposals related to digital assets that they published in the fall of 2022, if I recall off the top of my head.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? Yes.
Thank you. Additionally, everything everyone said here was true. A big portion of this is ensuring that there's consistency in the AML-CFT framework globally across jurisdictions, since it is global in nature. Additionally, the department did send forward this past year a term sheet that outlines our thoughts in terms of legislation that could be productive here. We're able to do a lot in this space, but those proposals outline an even more robust response for us.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was very helpful, at least for me. I do want to ask about another thing that was touched upon by a few people, and that is the issue of AI. You know, right now you have a lot of human traffickers, people have been humanly trafficked, but AI could take that over. Could you comment a little bit about that? Not that that's good, obviously, it's a terrible thing, but you know, there's another opportunity for scammers. Who would like to take a shot? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd be happy to, Congressman. It is an important risk you highlight, and something that we need to increase public awareness of, particularly around video chatting and the ability to real-time facial swap. We're seeing increasingly fraudsters using that sort of technology to appear like someone they are not, to defraud someone who now has the visceral feeling of being on a video call, seeing their face, and perhaps seeing a face that they trust, and not realizing it is AI in real time changing that face to further that deception. And so it really fundamentally changes how we trust people we interact with over the internet.
In fact, I was reading an article that was stating that we trust AI oftentimes more than we trust, you know, other forms of communication, other forms of information, because they seem to be objective. But it's because they're getting so good. I think it would be a fairly good way to scam people. Yes, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. What I would also say about AI is it enables the scammers to exponentially increase the number of scam conversations they are having at a given time.
Yeah.
And so we're concerned already about what they're doing with the limited number of people they have and their human traffic victims, and what if they could exponentially increase that?
My time's up. I do hope that there is more government collaboration. I think you're all right. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. With that, we go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kim. She's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, every victim of these romance confidence scams, or pig butchering as is known, has a story to tell. Whether it was a father, mother, brother, sister, son, or daughter, they were all yearning for the same: to trust someone, find love, and a companion. According to FBI estimates from last year, 2023, pig butchering scams stole nearly $4 billion from tens and thousands of American victims. That is about 53% increase from the year before. And California alone experienced more than $1.1 billion in losses from the cybercurrency scams, according to the same report by FBI. And these types of scams are in the business of trafficking the trust, hopes, and dreams of people for financial gain, and in turn, devastate individuals and families. Simply put, these scams are one of the purest forms of evil. It seems that most of these scams are run by transnational criminal organizations out of Southeast Asia with ties to Chinese criminal organizations. So in your view, I would like to pose this question to Mr. Rembrandt, and any one of you can please chime in. Has the People's Republic of China, its government, done enough to crack down on these criminals? And can you, Mr. Rembrandt, talk about any engagement with countries like Cambodia, Laos, Thailand to help us in our fight against pig butchering, and are they doing enough to help us?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. Every 2 years, our office works across the interagency to publish something called the National Money Laundering Risk Assessment, a consolidated view of money laundering risk, threats, vulnerabilities that our nation faces. In the last 2 iterations, Chinese money laundering organizations have appeared front and center in the global go-to professional money laundering organizations to launder funds, given how quickly, efficiently, effectively, and cheaply they're able to do it. As it relates to human trafficking and online scam centers and the hundreds of thousands of people that are trafficked and then forced to work at these places, Chinese transnational organized crime has played and continues to play a role in these scams. In terms of specific jurisdictions, China has cracked down over the last couple of years dramatically on online scams, since their citizens were one of the largest victims of online scams. They've worked with Myanmar, it would appear, law enforcement to repatriate tens of thousands of Chinese nationals that were forced to work at these scams. And I think the lessons are, one, from China has probably put a lot of pressure on these jurisdictions to make sure this stops ripping off their nationals, and I think we could learn something from that. As it relates to the other jurisdictions on Cambodia, I spoke to my counterparts on Monday following OFAC's designation and demanding they take action as it relates to investigations, prosecutions, and asset forfeiture related to this. Yeah. In addition, Vietnam is currently has something called an action plan with the Financial Action Task Force to improve its AML-CFT regime. Improvements on its virtual assets regulation supervision is essential to that, and we've had discussions with them on how we can improve potential technical assistance to Vietnamese to help them. So I think it's very country-specific. Myanmar is probably the most challenging given some of their governance, law enforcement, and other challenges right now in the jurisdiction, but they're also subject to the Financial Action Task Force.
Thank you. I'm glad that you also mentioned the Financial Action Task Force and the work that you're doing to cooperate in that regard. But I want to ask a question to Ms. West. I want to thank you for your work to crack down on pig butchering and your efforts to recover funds from the stolen funds from the victims. So can you elaborate on why it's easier to recover money when it's transferred to crypto exchanges than using other types of assets like cash? And does it make tracking down funds easier when they use digital assets? And if you can elaborate.
Right, thank you for your question. What I will say is when you look at those statistics that you pointed out, I, like you, am a Californian, and when I look at those statistics and see that our state is getting hit over twice as hard as the next nearest state, we have good reason to be concerned. Further, I'm very familiar with some of the activity going on in your particular county, and it's a massive problem in Orange County, and so I'm glad you're taking an interest today. I think what we need to think about is that this is an extraordinary international problem that requires international cooperation. And I think that the United States should be a leader in trying to drive that cooperation and not sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it. We've got a massive catastrophe happening in Southeast Asia, and we need to take some leadership, and we need to start figuring out a better way to be applying pressure and getting and building community that'll work together on this.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. We got to the, next we go to the gentleman from Wisconsin. Mr. Fitzgerald is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to wave on this afternoon. The U.S. Secret Service investigates a variety of cyber-related criminal activity, including the illicit use of digital assets through its global network of 44 cyber fraud task forces. Significant aspects of this illicit activity involve unlicensed money, transmitting businesses, the illicit structuring of transactions, and other criminal activity against organizations that are not federally insured financial institutions, but are financial institutions as defined under the Bank Secrecy Act. To address the problem, I was pleased to work with my colleagues on FS to advance Combating Money Laundering in Cybercrime Act out of both Financial Services and Judiciary, of which I'm also a member. The bill would harmonize criminal and banking statutes and clarify the Secret Service's investigative authority over crimes related to illicit digital asset transactions. Mr. Noyes, could you briefly touch on the important role of the Secret Service in fighting illicit transactions?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership in the work of this committee earlier this year, advancing that bill on a unanimous bipartisan basis. The Secret Service's founding purpose is to investigate transnational fraud. At the time we were founded, that was counterfeit currency. As the financial system has evolved, our investigative responsibilities have largely kept pace with that. We face a challenge now where our investigative responsibility is focused on federally insured financial institutions, as you know, but we are seeing substantial illicit activity occurring outside of those in other financial institutions as defined under the Bank Secrecy Act. And so keeping us at pace to be able to investigate that activity and then also implementing the legislative proposals from the Department of Justice around our ability to recover digital assets is foundational to to us being able to address this problem and keep Americans safe from crime.
Very good, thank you. I was also pleased to co-lead the Empowering Law Enforcement to Combat Financial Fraud Act, which was recently introduced. Mr. Nunn from Iowa and I introduced that. This bill would allow several law enforcement grant program the funding to be used towards blockchain tracing technology and also to fight just in general financial crimes. Criminals, as you know, are increasingly using digital assets and other blockchain-based technology to scam Americans. Usually, again, unfortunately, elderly, and it's a significant amount of money oftentimes. So many of these crimes do not reach the threshold for federal intervention, and state and local have limited resources in this area. So, but to Ms. West, can you discuss how blockchain can be an effective tool for law enforcement to curb illicit activity, even when privacy coins and other tactics such as mixers are being used?
Absolutely. What we're finding is that increasingly the crime that is being brought to state and locals involves some piece of cryptocurrency in it. And what we know is that frequently local law enforcement is not prepared to meet that challenge. They don't have the tools, training, or bandwidth to do that. And that's why we created the Crypto Coalition. The Crypto Coalition is a group of more than 2,000 local and state, and actually a good significant chunk of Secret Service who constantly jumps in to help. And in that listserv, we are able to share best practices and be able to teach each other how we can use the blockchain as an investigative tool. The bill that you are behind is a fantastic opportunity because it recognizes the fact that that's how bad guys move money. We all need to understand that we have a terrific tool at our disposal, the blockchain, that shows us where that money goes. And that using commercially available tools, we are able to trace through mixers. We are able to trace through a lot of the obfuscation that bad guys put in our way. And so we want to make that tool available to law enforcement. If that's how bad guys are moving money, we need to know how to trace it and how to get it back into the hands of our victims. So your bill is invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. With that, we've exhausted the number of folks who are interested in participating in the hearing today, and we want to thank all of our witnesses. You guys are great. Did a good job of answering the questions quickly and thoroughly. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions to the witnesses, to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witness for their response. I ask that you please respond as quickly as possible. With that, this hearing is adjourned.